If you're in your 60s and you've told yourself it's too late to start investing, I need you to hear this clearly. That belief is costing you more than any bad investment ever could. It's not caution. It's not wisdom. It's a lie you've been sold, and today we're taking it apart piece by piece. Because here's the truth nobody says out loud enough. You are not too old to invest. You are not too late. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that fear has been holding you back and what to do instead, starting today. Let's talk about where this belief even comes from, because it doesn't come from nowhere. For decades, the financial world has marketed investing almost exclusively toward the young. Start early. Let compound interest do the work. Time in the market beats timing the market. All true statements. But somewhere along the way, they got twisted into a different message entirely. If you didn't start at 25, don't bother starting at all. That's not what the original advice ever meant. It simply meant earlier is better than later. It never meant later is worthless. Those are two very different ideas, and mixing them up has quietly convinced an entire generation of people over 60 to sit on the sidelines of their own financial future. Think about how this belief actually gets reinforced. You turn on the news and the financial segments are aimed at 25-year-olds buying their first index fund. You scroll social media and the influencers talking about investing are decades younger than you, using language that feels like it wasn't built with you in mind. Nobody sat you down and said directly, here's how someone in their 60s should think about investing. So in that silence, a lot of people quietly filled in the blank themselves. And the answer they landed on was, I guess this isn't for me anymore. That assumption was never based on real math. It was based on the absence of anyone speaking directly to your situation. Here's the math that gets left out of the conversation. Let's say you're 62 years old today. Depending on your health and family history, you could reasonably expect 20, 25, even 30 more years of life. That's not a short runway. That's an entire investing lifetime. Comparable to someone who started investing in their 30s and retired in their 50s or 60s. 25 years of growth is not too late. It's a completely legitimate, valuable window of time for your money to work for you. Let's put a real number to it. Imagine you have $20,000 sitting in a low-interest savings account, earning next to nothing. If that same $20,000 were invested and grew at a conservative average annual return over 20 years, it wouldn't just sit there. It could roughly double, potentially more, depending on the investments chosen and market conditions. That's real, meaningful growth, achieved simply by refusing to believe the lie that your investing window has closed. And here's a version of this that hits even closer to home for a lot of people watching. Let's say instead of a lump sum, you're able to set aside $200 a month, starting today at 62. Over 20 years, that's $48,000 in contributions alone. But invested, rather than left in cash, that money has the opportunity to grow well beyond what you put in, potentially adding tens of thousands of dollars on top, simply from consistent contributions and time in the market. That's not a fantasy. That's simply what happens when money is allowed to grow instead of sitting completely still. Now, I want to address the fear underneath this belief, because it's not really about math, it's about risk. A lot of people over 60 assume that investing at their age means gambling with money they can't afford to lose. That fear isn't irrational. It comes from a real place. You've worked decades for what you have, and the idea of watching it disappear in a market downturn feels terrifying, in a way it simply didn't when you were younger and had decades to recover. But here's what gets missed. Investing after 60 doesn't mean investing the same way you would have at 30. It means investing appropriately for your stage of life. There's an enormous difference between don't invest at all and invest with a strategy suited to someone in their 60s, 70s, or beyond. Those are not the same decision, but the fear often collapses them into one. A thoughtful, age-appropriate investment approach after 60 typically shifts toward a greater balance of stability and growth, not abandoning growth altogether, but not chasing high-risk speculative bets either. This is often described as a more conservative allocation, a mix that still includes growth-oriented investments, but balanced with more stable, income-generating options designed to reduce large swings in value. The goal isn't to gamble. The goal is to keep your money growing faster than inflation while managing risks sensibly for your timeline. And that brings up something critical: inflation. This is the danger hiding on the other side of the too late lie, the one nobody warns you about enough. If your money sits entirely in cash or a basic savings account earning next to nothing, it isn't neutral. It isn't safe in the way it feels safe. Inflation quietly erodes its purchasing power every single year. Money that buys a full cart of groceries today buys noticeably less in 10 or 15 years, if it isn't growing at least in line with rising prices. In other words, doing nothing isn't a neutral choice. It's a choice to slowly lose value, guaranteed, versus the possibility of losing value temporarily in the market, which historically has recovered and grown over any sufficiently long time horizon. Let's sit with that for a moment because it's counterintuitive. Most people think of cash as the safe choice and investing as the risky one. But over a 20-year horizon, that framing flips. Cash sitting idle has a near certain guaranteed outcome. It loses purchasing power slowly and steadily, year after year, without exception. Investments carry short-term ups and downs, yes, but over long stretches of time, a properly diversified portfolio has historically grown well beyond inflation. So the real risk isn't investing after 60. The real risk is refusing to and letting inflation quietly shrink your savings year after year while you assume you're playing it safe. Let's talk about a few specific situations because too late to invest actually covers a few different fears bundled together. The first fear, I don't have enough money left to make investing worth it. This one is simply false. Investing isn't reserved for large sums. Even modest amounts invested consistently can meaningfully grow over 10, 15, 20 years. It's not about starting with a fortune. It's about giving whatever you do have the chance to grow, instead of guaranteeing it stays flat or shrinks to inflation. Whether you have $5,000 or $500,000, the same principle applies. Money that isn't working for you is quietly losing value, and money that's invested sensibly at any amount has the chance to grow instead. The second fear, I don't understand investing, so it's too risky for someone my age to start now. Understandable, but this isn't 1995 anymore. There are more low-cost, straightforward, professionally managed investment options available today than ever before. Target date funds, for example, are specifically designed to automatically become more conservative as you age, without requiring you to actively manage complex decisions yourself. You don't need to become a stock-picking expert. You need a sound, simple strategy, and those exist accessibly for people exactly in your position. In many cases, opening this kind of investment account and choosing a fund appropriate for your age takes less time than setting up a new streaming service subscription. The third fear, if the market crashes, I won't have time to recover. This is where thoughtful allocation matters most. Someone in their 60s typically shouldn't have their entire portfolio in aggressive growth stocks. That part of the fear is legitimate. But a properly balanced portfolio, mixing growth investments with more stable holdings, is built specifically to reduce the depth of potential downturns, while still capturing enough growth to outpace inflation over the years ahead. This is precisely why working with a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor, someone legally required to act in your best interest, can be so valuable at this stage. Not to gamble, but to build a strategy matched to your actual timeline and needs. There's a fourth fear worth naming too, even though people rarely say it directly. What if I invest and then need the money sooner than I expect? This is a legitimate planning question, not a reason to avoid investing altogether. The answer isn't don't invest. The answer is structure your money in layers. Keep an accessible emergency fund in cash for near-term needs, enough to cover unexpected expenses without having to sell investments at an inconvenient time. Then let the portion of your savings you're not likely to need for years continue growing, invested appropriately for your timeline. This layered approach lets you have both safety and growth rather than treating it as an all-or-nothing decision. Let's talk about something equally important, the emotional cost of sitting on the sidelines. Every year you avoid investing out of fear is a year you can never get back. Unlike a missed vacation or a skipped purchase, lost investment time is permanent. Those years of potential growth simply don't return. 10 years from now, the difference between someone who invested modestly and consistently starting today versus someone who waited until things felt safer can be substantial. Not because one person was smarter, but because one person let time do what time does, and the other let fear make the decision instead. Consider two people, both 62 today. One decides the too late story is true and keeps their savings entirely in a low-interest account for the next 15 years. The other accepts that 15 years is still real, meaningful time and invests the portion of their savings they don't need immediately in a balanced, age-appropriate way. Assuming reasonable, historically consistent growth for the investor and continued erosion from inflation for the saver, the gap between these two outcomes after 15 years isn't small. It can represent tens of thousands of dollars in real difference, not from luck, but simply from one person allowing time and growth to work and the other refusing to let it. So what should you actually do starting today if you've believed this lie until now? First, separate your money into two categories in your mind. Money you'll need in the next 1 to 3 years for living expenses should generally stay safe and easily accessible. That's not what we're talking about investing aggressively, but money you won't need for 5, 10, 20 years, savings sitting idle, doing nothing but slowly losing value to inflation. That's exactly the money that deserves a real, thoughtful investment strategy. Second, talk to a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor, specifically one experienced working with retirees and near retirees. Ask them directly, given my age, my timeline, and my goals, what's an appropriate, balanced way to invest the portion of my savings I don't need in the immediate future? A good advisor won't push you toward reckless risk. They'll help you find the right balance for your actual situation. If you don't currently have an advisor, ask friends or family for referrals, or look specifically for advisors who describe their practice as working with retirement age clients. This isn't a generic search, it's a specific one. Third, start simple if the idea still feels overwhelming. Broad, diversified, low-cost index funds or target date funds are specifically designed to remove complexity, spreading your investment across many companies and asset types at once, rather than betting on any single stock or sector. This isn't about complicated strategies. It's about giving your money a reasonable chance to grow without requiring you to become a full-time investor. You don't need to check it daily. You don't need to react to every headline. You need a sound structure and then patience. Fourth, start now, even if it feels small. The version of you 5, 10, 15 years from now will not care that you started with a modest amount. They will care that you started at all instead of waiting for a feeling of readiness that, frankly, may never fully arrive. Waiting for certainty before you begin is its own kind of decision, and it's one that guarantees the lost time, while investing simply risks temporary fluctuation in exchange for a real chance at growth. Fifth, revisit your plan periodically, not obsessively. Once a year, sit down with your advisor if you have one or on your own if you don't, and check whether your investment mix still matches your timeline and comfort level. As you move further into retirement, it's normal and appropriate for your allocation to shift gradually toward more stability. This isn't a set it and walk away forever decision, but it's also not something that needs daily attention. An annual check-in is enough. Here's the bigger truth I want to leave you with. The phrase "too late to invest" isn't really about your age. It's about fear dressed up as logic. And the tragedy of believing it isn't a dramatic market crash. It's the quiet, steady erosion of money that could have grown, simply because it sat still out of caution, that felt reasonable in the moment but wasn't actually protecting you at all. You have more time than the lie wants you to believe. 20 years, 25 years, maybe more. That's not the end of your financial story. That's still an entire chapter, waiting to be written. And how you invest today plays a real role in how comfortable, how secure, and how free that chapter gets to be. Think about what those years could actually hold if the money sitting idle right now were finally given the chance to grow. Not a fortune built overnight, not a reckless bet. Just steady, sensible growth, compounding quietly in the background, the same way it always has for anyone willing to let it work, regardless of the age they started. If this video changed how you think about investing at this stage of life, follow along, because I share real, practical financial strategies made specifically for people building security and confidence later in life. And tell me honestly in the comments, have you been holding back from investing because you thought it was too late? Let's talk about it.